This is going to be a handheld camera video. Catus Maximus here. Actually, one of my favorite basic miter saws. Kind of a lost art. A basic miter saw. Everything is either, compound or 12-inch or sliding, and kind of a lost art of the 10-inch simple or standard miter saw. Just swivels back and forth. No bevel, but these Makita 1030Ns. This one's 25 years old. Made in 1999. Replaced the really long-running 1030, and it's just a new model. But really like this saw. 4,600 RPM at 15 amps. I have a Milwaukee Magnum 4,800 RPM compound miter saw in 10-inch. Doesn't seem to quite deliver like this one. So my camera didn't work the first two cuts, but it did work the second of two cuts. And that's the thing, I mean, you don't go really fast with the chop saw, but it has plenty of power to drive that 10-inch blade. So always kind of remember about these things. I had one more than 5 years ago, ended up selling it. It was probably 6 or 7 years ago. I don't even think I have a video on this. Actually, I don't have a video on this on YouTube, so it was 7 years ago. Anyway, a little low in cash, sold it, and as luck would have it, many years later, another one showed up. So this looks like it's kind of had a fair amount of use. When it comes to miter saws, especially like a quarter-century old one, kind of weird to say, they end up with a lot more wear and tear being moved around rather than actual operational time, because these aren't the type of tools that, like sanders, where you're doing short bursts. And I will mention once again the Makita, or actually not even once again, this is the first time in this video, my Milwaukee compound miter saw, unless you really let off the trigger quickly, the electric brake doesn't always engage, but in Makita tools, they always seem to work every single time. Really solid electric brake system in these. Obviously, it's a brush motor, so it has a special winding on the motor and a special trigger, so when you release the trigger, it takes the brushes and feeds them back into that special brake winding, essentially causing the motor to temporarily reverse. Because it's an inefficient brush motor, it's able to brake some, and it starts braking until the voltage drops too low, and then it has to coast the rest of the way because it can't maintain a magnetic field. That's why those the electric brakes on brush tools never come to a total stop, because it's essentially taking the residual energy and magnetism and momentarily making the motor once again feed back on itself. But still a pretty good electric brake here. Works every time. We do have a little safety here. Let me unplug this the rest of the way. I've often seen these bypassed or little nails jammed into them. I don't mind this safety because versus like the Milwaukee and even the earlier 1030, which had stick handles, this has a loop handle and just a full grip trigger, really easy to accidentally bump. And this, that button is really easy to hit in it. You don't get second chances when it comes to big saws like this. Another thing I'll mention is you can still get parts like this guard here. Somebody bashed it into the blade at some point. But as far as the mechanism, there's some saws where the mechanism just doesn't work too well, but it actually, for as clanky and clunky as it is, it's really a solid and reliable guard. Will certainly prevent you from accidentally touching your hand against the blade or something like that when you're grabbing a piece of wood after a cut. With the 10-inch, it is true. So, and you saw you don't push it super hard, but it can just drive in the solid wood, just no problem. I will admit that is a, well, you can't even see on that side. Well, you can see how coarse this is. This is a brand new carbide tipped Milwaukee Endurance. This is an old made in New Zealand Milwaukee blades, and they're actually pretty well rated. But as you can see here, this is coarse. This is a 24 tooth, 10-inch blade. 24 teeth are common in 7 1/4 inch framing saws. Kind of something like this. This may be a saw some of my viewers have heard of before. But take that same coarseness and apply it to a 10-inch blade, and you've got some big old teeth that are pretty widely spaced. Taking a pretty good cut and non-issue. It just drives right through it. You can once again cut a 4x10. You just will have to take it and flip it over in order to do so. But it's rated to cut a 4x6 in one pass. And it's more of a basic saw. You know, on the Milwaukee, they have a big needle bearing, so it swivels real easy. This one I had to lube up quite a bit to get it to want to swivel. I put a bolt in here. It was missing the bottom handle. The locking handles are oftentimes bent and broken. This one here, we can see that if I put it in position, I'm going to stand on it because there's still quite a bit of friction on this thing. It still has this metal tab. It locks into the little teeth that are cast in along this angle gauge. And it has all the common stops. You can stop at any point you want. But this positively engages at like every 5 degrees, and of course 15, 22.5, 30, 45. And for doing, I guess certain molding, I'm not the best carpenter if you haven't noticed, but it goes 45 degrees left and 52 degrees right. These holes, if people don't know, the large holes on miter saws are for clamps, and they're just a tight-fitting post. So when you clamp the wood, it causes the post to tilt over a little bit and bind in the hole. They're pretty effective. I actually have one for a Makita. It's a frustration. That hole size is not standardized. One post clamp in a Milwaukee won't work in a Makita and vice versa. And they're pretty rare. And very rare to find accessory. We do have holes on both sides. So there was, and I've seen pictures online of table extensions, which is just an extra piece that hangs off, just to give you a little more area. I have it on my, once again, my Milwaukee. But it just adds extra weight and bulk. And the point of these is just to be a basic miter saw. I mean, pretty solid connection. It's just 2 bolts with a big cast piece there. Pretty tight hinge. I mean, I wobble this back and forth. I mean, there is very little play. And overall, not a bad design. It just has a simple friction bolt there to adjust the depth stop. That ends up hitting just the aluminum casting here. So what ends up happening is that little area, the bolt can kind of dig in, so that's why you can adjust it. And the reason you do want to adjust it is you don't want the saw cutting so deep into the blade recess that starts cutting. I've seen miter saws that's happened to. Flip them over and you end up cutting the bottom of it in half. Really pretty nice casting. That is one heck of a mold to cast this bottom piece. So it's very complicated, but overall decent. It even has a little rear foot, a simple little lock, and you know, it's reasonably heavy, but it's lightweight enough to carry around. And that's one of the other nice things is, unless you need the compound, then you can get rid of it. You always have straight cuts, and you lose the complexity and the weight and the cost. And on a job site, many times you do not need to cut 2 simultaneous angles. Or you can even get away with making a cut one way, turning the piece of material 90 degrees, and then making your second cut to give you that compound angle. It's just compound miter saws can do both at the same time. Other than that, not much else to say about a review, but if you do run into one of these LS1030Ns, I think the 1040 is a 12-inch version. They really are just a solid miter saw, and with the 4600 RPM on the 10-inch, I actually have quite a bit of power, probably one of the more torquey and robust 10-inch saws out there, and it really will just go through the material, wet material, pressure treated plastics. And even though you're not supposed to, you can get away with putting a steel cutting blade, a Diablo Steel Demon or something in it, and the saw is robust enough where if you go, easy, you can cut. I mean, somewhere on YouTube I ran into a video where somebody was not just cutting metal studs and metal framework, but they were cutting angle iron with one of those steel cutting blades, and they just went pretty easy, and the saw didn't sound too bad. It has a surprising amount of versatility, and that's why I like it. It's just hard to beat. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, it used to be like these Delta cast iron base miter saws, and this thing just smokes them in basically all regards. And it's a shame that they're not more common now, but if you're actually cutting stuff with the miter saw for a living and you don't need to compound, something like this just will pay itself off, kind of like that skill saw. I did want to point this out too, where I was checking these brushes, see how hard it's been run. There's no discoloration of the copper wire. It's never been overloaded or just run so hard that's overheated. But I was noticing the front of the brush. See those bevels on it? These brushes haven't even finished breaking in. That's how low runtime it is on these saws. And so the thing, miter saws, generally the motors are good. If you can pull out the brushes real fast, it's an easy way to see if it's really been run hard, if it gets the brushes hot enough to discolor the little connection wire. The other thing, when you're buying these, is to give the frame a good look. That's actually the most common type of damage, is some type of breakage on the chassis where it's been dropped at some point. Usually not getting knocked off a table or something. Carpenters who are using this, like, may put it between two sawhorses or something. We'll just run a quick nail or something to keep it from falling, but it's loading and unloading and transportation damage. So that would be my video of the Makita LS1030N 10-inch basic miter saw. Really do like it, just for being able to pop it out and just doing a couple simple cuts, and it's not bulky and it's easy to move around. It's the kind of saw I can loan to a friend. You're not really worried about them burning it up or getting into trouble trying to do complicated cuts. And something that can last years and years and just not give you any grief. Anyway, thanks for watching.